Hello, everyone. Let's discuss this very interesting article about multi-vessel PCI guided by FFR or angiography for myocardial infarction. This article is an original article from New England Journal of Medicine, and it was published. It was published yesterday. So it's a very recent article. And I found very interesting to discuss this article with you. Okay, what is the clinical problem? The clinical problem is in patients with ST segment elevation, myocardial infarction, STEME, and multivessel disease, whether complete revascularization guided by fractional flow reserve, FFR, results in better clinical outcomes than complete revascularization guided by angiography is unclear. So what is the design of this clinical trial? It's a randomized, open-label, multi-center trial that was conducted to compare the two approaches in patients with ST elevation myocardial infarction and multivessel disease. What is the intervention? 1,171 patients who had undergone successful percutaneous coronary intervention PCI of an infarct-related artery were assigned to FFR-guided or angiography-guided complete revascularization. PCI was recommended for lesions with an FFR value of 0.80 or less. Non-culprit lesions PCI was performed in fewer patients in the FFR-guided group than in the angiography-guided group. The primary outcome was a composite of death, non-fatal myocardial infarction, or unplanned hospitalization with urgent revascularization at 1 year. Well, these are the two things that we want to measure. The FFR guided complete revascularization. We want to compare the outcomes with the angiography guided complete revascularization. So here we have the two different interventions that we want to compare, right? So let's see the Picot analysis. The population is 1,171 patients who had undergone successful percutaneous coronary intervention, PCI, of an infarct-related artery. The intervention is FFR guide PCI procedure with a number of patients 590. And the control is the angiography guided PCI procedure with a number of patients of 581. The outcome is a composite of all-cause death, non-fatal myocardial infarctions, unplanned hospitalizations with urgent revascularization, and the time is at 1 year. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the consent and randomization. The randomization was performed in a 1-to-1 ratio with the use of randomly permuted blocks of 2 or 4, and was stratified according to the trial site and timing of the procedure, immediate or staged. The randomization was performed immediately after consent was obtained through an internet-based centralized system. In other words, it was used as software and telemedicine technologies. How was the calculation of the sample size? Why too many patients? Well, they calculate a sample size of 1,170 patients, okay? Because they thought it will provide the trial with a power of at least 80% at a two-side alpha of 5% to reject the null hypothesis of no between groups difference, assuming that the incidence of the primary outcome was 9.5%. And this is an important number here because they assuming that, but at the end, we will see that it was very important because they didn't reach this percentage. It was very low. with the FFR guide strategy and 50% with the angiography guide strategy, giving an anticipated 5% loss to follow up at 1 year. These estimates were based on the results of previous studies. So they used the estimation of previous studies. Okay. So now let's talk about the statistical analysis. All analyses were performed on an intention to treat basis. The incidence of clinical events and other categorical data are summarized as percentage. Continuous data are presented as means, or standard deviations, or as medians and interquartile ranges. What they use for the statistical analysis, they use Kaplan-Meier plots. They were constructed for time to event outcomes with treatment effects estimated with the use of Coates models and results presented as hazard ratios with 95% confidence intervals. Okay. The treatment effect was estimated with the use of the ratio of the two means. Okay. So now let's see a little bit those results. And other important thing is the planned subgroups analysis of the primary outcome were performed according to age, less than 65 years versus more than 65 years, sets presence of risk factors like diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and family history of coronary artery disease, history of cardiovascular disease, and clinical presentation. For the primary outcome, a two-side p-value of less than 0.05 was considered to indicate statistical significance. Secondary outcomes are presented with effect size estimated at 95% confidence intervals. The width of the confidence intervals have not been adjusted for multiplicity, and any inference drawn from these intervals may not be reproducible. They use the software SAS. Results. The mean and standard deviation number of stents that were placed per patient per non-correlation was 1.01 in the FFR guide group and 1.50 in the angiography guided group. Okay, during the follow-up, a primary outcome event occurred, and this is, I think this is very, very relevant, occurred in 32 of 586 patients, 5.5% in the FFR guide group. We did the estimation that it's going to be higher, and 24 in 577 patients, 4.2% in the angiography guide group. So that was it was very relevant because the estimation that we did before was high, gave us a higher percentage, and the results were really a very little size, right? A less percentage than the percentage that was estimated at the beginning. So the hazard ratio was 1.32. 95% confidence interval, but if we see the confidence interval is coming from 0.78 to 2.23, so the confidence interval crossed the value of 1, and also the p is 0.31, so there is not a statistical significance. Okay. So let's see this. So the primary outcome, if we see here, okay, is a composite of death from any cause. If we see here, the confidence interval cross the value 1. For non-fatal myocardial infarction, the same thing, and it's very wide. It's coming from 0.82 to 3.84. So it's very wide. And also in all the groups, we can see that. So there is not a significant difference between the groups. So limitations and remaining questions. Because of the low incidence of primary outcome events, the confidence interval was quite wide, potentially limiting the ability to exclude substantial harm or benefit of FFR guide treatment. Okay? Evaluation of the completeness of revascularization was not performed by a core laboratory and instead relied on the investigator's assessment. And the third point is investigators were encouraged to perform complete revascularization during the index procedure, but in practice, most patients underwent stage multivessel procedures. A randomized trial comparing immediate and stage PCI could address the issue of the most effective timing. The trial has several limitations. Only limited information was captured regarding patients who had undergone screening but were not eligible to participate in the trial. And as a consequence, although they found no significant benefit of the FFR guided strategy, the confidence intervals for the hazard ratio for the primary outcome are quite wide, as I told you before, and compatible with either a 22% relative benefit or a 123% relative harm associated with the FFR guide strategy. So the problem was in the confidence interval, and I think in the percentage in the sample size also that we're estimating. I mean, given, and this is the point, given the low incidence of event observed, more than 8,000 participants, so it's a lot, will be needed to show a 15% lower relative risk of the composite outcome. This reduction will correspond to a lower absolute risk of 0.6 percentage points for the FFR guide strategy, a difference of doubtful clinical significance. These considerations may make any attempt at future comparisons between these two strategies difficult. Finally, for logistical reasons, the evaluation of the completeness of revascularization was not performed by a core laboratory and relied on the investigators' evaluations. So there is a lot of things that can influence the results of this study. Conclusions: an FFR guided strategy for complete revascularization in patients with ST elevation myocardial infarction and multivessel disease was not superior to an angiography guided strategy for reducing the risk of major adverse cardiac events. However, given the wide confidence interval for the primary outcome, the findings do not allow for a conclusive interpretation. So this is a very good example of how the statistics can influence the results. It's very important to calculate the right size of the population for the study, and not all the time previous studies are going to help us to calculate the right number of people. All right, I hope that you enjoyed this discussion. This is all for now. Bye bye.